All right. This is going to be, I think, one of the most important videos I've ever done. Of course, everyone, no, I'm serious. Jeff Lutz is here. I called Jeff yesterday. I said, Jeff, I need you, man. We need to we need to
Morning.
talk about this cost of goods thing. Thank you, Jeff, for coming on
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here.
All right. So what we had in the call was we had an awful lot of conversation about the cost of goods with regard to the auto side. We won't get into anything else except the auto side this morning. But on the cost of goods side, there was a fairly, I think, shocking reduction in cost of goods on the cars on the order of 9%. And then in the call, there was this comment made that all of the press, all of the idiots, I'm sorry, all the people that are not paying attention picked up on, which was, oh, well, we're now at the limit of what we can do on the current models, meaning the Y and the 3. I don't think that's what happened at all. And I don't think Jeff thinks that's what happened at all because I asked him on X yesterday, hey, Jeff, what kind of number do you think they could do next year? And he went 8 to 10%. And
Mhm.
I almost lost my cookies. Jeff, can we just walk through some of the actual statements yesterday and let me have you respond to the comments? Will that work?
Sure.
All right. First of all, it says, in our vehicle business, we continue to see improvements in our per unit costs despite us being in the early phase of the Cybertruck ramp. As a result, our auto gross margin improves sequentially. That said, predicting auto gross margins is extremely challenging since there are many moving parts to the equation, some of which are out of our control, like the change in tariffs or local incentives. All right. While the teams are focused on cost reductions, we are approaching the limits within our current platforms. I think they meant by that the 3 and the Y. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, throw S and X in there too, but
Right.
I've got comments on this.
Go ahead. Go.
Yeah, anybody who builds anything of duration over a year, a lifespan, will drive COGs continuously. There's no the point where it goes to zero is when you're actually end of lifing the product and you're not buying any more components. Until that point in time, you are taking your cost structure down. And there's many different approaches to do it. And if you listen to what Tesla said on that call, they actually go through several of the approaches. But I mean, I listened to it and I was just putting it in a contract because I understand I've actually been in the role of doing this. And you heard the engineering leads talk about, Drew said, I've got my list. Lars says that, you also spoke to all the different things that's called an event-driven COGS reduction list. That means you're going to do something X to the product, whether it's in your factory or in the supply base, to your design or to your process. You're going to build a product. You're going to change it to get a lower cost structure. It could be reducing a process, eliminating a process, combining two parts, simplifying a part, anything. But that's an event-driven list. That continues. That will continue as long as they have a set of ideas. And so they said they do. And normally that takes a couple of quarters for those to play out. So I see several quarters ahead of just event-driven lists. Now, the supply chain team, both of their VPs are on the call. They stepped up. One of them very eloquently said, and I've been talking about this in several videos, is that we're going to forward lever all of our new products into our COGS reduction plan, meaning we're Tesla. We build the highest volume vehicle in the world. And as a supplier, if you want to jump on this train or you want to stay on this train, there's a ticket you got to punch to do it. And we're going to work with you. Tesla, I believe that they're very kind of like a win-win approach with their supply base. I think they've helped many smaller, medium to smaller suppliers become massive globally. So it's not that they're unfair, but every quarter, what's going to happen is they're going to put their hand out and they're going to say, look, my volumes are growing. You should be getting more efficient as a supplier. I want to share in some of those efficiencies. I need something out of you every single quarter. That's the next area they're going to get reductions from. Third area, we've now gone from disinflationary PPI to deflationary PPI, both in China. It started in China and now in the US. So commodity prices are coming down. Wind at Tesla's back. They've got long-term contracts. They don't feel the effects as rapidly as everyone else does when there's a big price increase. Where they will feel the effects faster than anybody else and put themselves in the front of the line is when there's a major decrease in commodity pricing, because number one, they're the biggest volume player. Number two, they move the velocity of where how their product moves to the factory is faster than anybody building the same prototype. So the car moves through the factory faster. And then when you look at their in-channel inventory, they have 1/10 the inventory that other competitors do that are building EVs. 1/10. They have industry leading channel inventory. And so when you take that whole thing and you put it together, their network latency is what it's called. Basically, when they buy material in and they push it out the back end and it gets sold to a consumer, that whole circle is happening faster than anyone else, which means they're getting COGS reductions in faster than everyone else. So those 3 or 4 reasons, I could probably go on for a half hour, but those are the reasons why they have an advantage over anyone else doing this. And that 3.5% that they printed in COGS reduction quarter on quarter shows that. Now, and then the 9% you refer to is more of an annualized view, which is how you should look at it. And what I'm saying is, going forward, the spigot is not dry. If you're a CFO, and I've worked with many CFOs and they're great, they have to be conservative. They have to say statements like this of like, look, these are the risks, these are what's happening. But when you heard the actual practitioners step up on the call, both supply chain VPs, Lars and Drew, said, no, this is what we're doing. This is our approach. Here's some recent examples. Here's what we're going after. So I'll pause there.
All right. So then we have just the general commodity prices, whether that be aluminum or steel or plastic, any oil-based products, which are the plastic, oil or natural gas-based products, which are all your plastics. All of these things are going down generally, not every week, not every month, but generally have been going down. And you're saying that the supply chain takes a while. It takes a minute. Now, they may be at the front of the line, but they have contracts that may take these into consideration, or they may not take them into consideration. So it might take a little longer. And some of that is going to play out next year, even if commodities flatten out. They still haven't captured all of those decreases in commodities. Would that be fair?
Yeah, correct. And the other thing that I left out, it could even be a fourth thing, is automobile suppliers. They have a choice of who they can work with, and there's just physics involved here. Hybrid plus ICE, it has negative growth planned for next year. Meaning, if you're a supplier in that space, you're fixed overhead capacity, your output, your efficiencies are all flatlining or going south potentially due to your input volume. EVs, on the other hand, everybody talks about this great EV apocalypse. EVs will continue growing. They grew at 35 to 40% depending on which region you were in last year. And the slowdown they're talking about is slowing down from 70%. But even if they grow at 20% this year, that's way more than the other auto component suppliers and just the auto industry themselves are dealing with. When you think about COGs, remember, COGs isn't just what you buy from suppliers. It's also your four-wall conversion cost that's inside of your gigafactories, like the Tom Zoo cost, and it's all the design input costs. But that's another important point, is that their COGS reduction plan is still going into a growing volume industry.
Exactly. Okay, so now the number one most expensive component of an electric car is the batteries. And you don't have to be a genius to read the headlines. Lithium is down, the other component costs are down, and the total cost of batteries is down. There's a glut of batteries. CATL is operating at something like 60 or 70% of their capacity because they can't sell all the batteries that they can make. And that's a system-wide problem. So people are talking about 55 cents a kilowatt hour as a possible number at the cell cost level from CATL later this year on some chemistries. But then you also add in the fact that Tesla is now making their own batteries, so they get a cost reduction from their own manufacturing compared to buying it from somebody else, and they're adding their own cathode plant, and they're adding their own production of lithium, the refined lithium.
Eventually.
All
Yeah.
of those things will be hitting the cost of goods sold in 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, I would say the lithium refining is a question mark in terms of when that hits. But the, they kick that off when that cost structure, both the cost structure and the supply of it, were in trouble. And they wanted to send a message to the supply base of like, we're going to buy everything you can give us. But guess what? We need to have a little bit of a governor and our own control on this. But yeah, you're right. The input cost of batteries are going down. Part of the reason is there is an overcapacity situation in both cell and pack assembly. And yeah, there's two big parts to this. There's three big parts. There's the raw materials and their pricing, they're coming down. There's the refining of those materials, part two. Part three is the cell fabrication. Part four is the pack assembly. And just the undeniable math is, you can see those cost trends, but the other undeniable math is a greater percentage of Tesla products shipped in 2024 will be of their own fabrication than in prior years. And when they produce a battery, they get a direct credit from the government on it as well. And then the ones that they co-produce with Panasonic, they also get a partial credit on. So people leave that out of the equation as well. Not only are the input costs coming down to batteries, but that credit is stagnant.
And then
It's
you
not
have
the credit. Yeah.
right. And then on top of that, in addition to all of those things, you also have the fact that there's chemistry improvements, there's improvements in the overall capabilities of the batteries. This will be going into the Tony Seba world, where Tony Seba made predictions about the cost of batteries coming down dramatically. He's actually conservative. They've come down faster than he put out in 2014 in a book. So it's not something that he can deny or that anybody else can deny. He's been completely accurate, and he continues to say that this will be a downward curve. So if nothing else went down, the cost of the batteries might represent 3, 4, 5% year over year in 2024.
Yeah. And remember this, Tesla is one of the biggest in auto. They're the biggest purchaser of that. Remember, BYD, does mostly their own fabrication. So in terms of external purchasing of this, they have the biggest leverage in the auto industry and really across most industries when you look at total capacity purchase. So yeah, this is where it becomes a little bit difficult to say, okay, you can put them on a number for COGS reductions for the year, and then like, where does it come from? Now it starts becoming a little bit difficult. Okay, where's exactly going to come from? And remember, there's risk in all this. When they fired up the Austin and Berlin plants, their COGs, their Model 3 and Y COGs shot up $3,000-$4,000, literally over 10%, when they fired those factories up because they're way underutilized.
Right.
So I would say when companies do this work, they have an opportunity list, they have a risk list. They call it an R&O list, or risk and opportunities list. And there's a risk and opportunities list for Tesla too. It's not all green, but what I would say is they've got an extensive ability to continue taking their COGs down, and I would believe there's way more opportunity than risk involved here.
Okay, so we have raw materials. We've got the battery, which is the number one and most expensive component in the car. Another one that they mentioned in the call was electronics. So we all know, that our television set that we just bought last year, the 80-inch television for $1,100 would have cost $10,000 10 years ago if there had been an 85-inch television 10 years ago. So electronics, it's a natural category. They laughed about it on the call. Yeah, duh, the cost of electronics comes down. Tons of electronic cost in a Tesla. Would you expect to see some reductions in that, again, just because of the natural direction of things?
Yeah, and one thing that's happening that people need to understand is when the pandemic hit, a lot of companies sent a very distressed signal to their suppliers, and those suppliers turned those fabs off, turned that capacity off, laid people off, and then it's like, oh my God, we have this huge undersupply issue, and then inflation went through the roof as a result, and then all these you're talking about electronics, all these fab suppliers kicked off a ton of capacity, and that's all coming online now. So, and then you're seeing China not recover at the rate originally planned. They're going to obviously throw a bunch of stimulus at that to help that. But yeah, you've got in some cases an overcapacity issue, and then you've got you have Moore's law that you've got you've got miniaturization that's occurring, and that's driving the unit economics down of each piece of silicon down. So you have both of those things happening together, and that will continue. By the way, um, I would think that the unit economics of the 48-volt architecture as designed are going to be cheaper than what it's replacing, but it's going to start disadvantaged from a volume perspective. And so you're going to have, on the one hand, it's going to have the simpler thing. On the other hand, it's going to be challenged from a volume perspective. However, the conversation with those suppliers go like this, like, hey, we're getting this out there in Cybertruck, we're getting it up, we're getting it scaled and going, but within a year, I'm going to be buying this for the 25K vehicle. I want that pricing now. I want you, so this is how when one of the supply chain VPs Karn, who talked about forward leveraging their new products. This is what I'm talking about. The whole 48-volt architecture conversation is they're not paying Cybertruck level scale pricing for that today. They're like, no, I'm going to be buying a ton of these for the 25K vehicle. I'm going to be buying these for Optimus, and and I want that cost structure pulled forward as soon as possible. You're going to have to stretch a little bit, supplier. I'm going to have to stretch a little bit. We'll work together on it. But these are the kind of things that they can do.
Yeah, okay. So then we have, again, they made a big point about it. They said that there was this design aspect. So we know that Tesla is constantly changing things on the fly. We've had Joe Justice and everybody talking about changes virtually every single day. A little design change here, a little bit of a part change there, a little bit, a bolt taken out and replaced with a fastener.
Yeah.
All these kinds of things. That's not going to stop.
Yeah, that's the event-driven list. That's one of
That's
the
one of
four
the
main things I talked about. That is the event-driven
Sure.
list. You can have an event-driven list from the design team. You can have an event-driven list from the supply chain leadership, meaning I'm going to introduce this third supplier in, and I'm going to reduce supplier number 2. You can have an event-driven item come in from Tom Zhu and his team of like, I'm going to take this station efficiency from X to Y, and I'm going to do it by combining these steps. And it's a manufacturing design change in part of the operation. They call that event-driven list. So there's volume driven, commodity driven of like, I'm increasing my volumes. Suppliers, you're getting more efficiency. I expect you to take your cost structure down. That's more of the supplier deflationary aspect. But then there's this event-driven aspect, and Tesla excels in that because that culture comes from the CEO down, and they work together on this stuff.
Yeah, okay. And so then we also have the Cybertruck, which is just beginning to ramp. And so it will probably be a negative impact in the early quarters of the year, but toward the end of the year, we should see a pretty steep. And also as the volumes increase, the number becomes more important as part of the total.
Correct. Yeah. What companies measure, some explicitly, some not so explicitly, is something called the time to break even on any new product line. What you're trying to do is you set that timeline, and for them in Cybertruck, it may be, I don't know, it could be 11 months, or I'm making up a number, 8 months, whatever that timeline is. Then you sit down and you put together a course of action of like, how could I accelerate? How could I accelerate getting to break even? Is it getting my units per hour in the factory from here to here? Is it getting my total process time from here to here? Is it doing this particular thing with a supplier? So what Tesla's trying to do is they're trying to take that time to break even and pull that closer to the left as possible.
Okay. Now, I, of course, was a manufacturer, and I've sold Target, Kmart, the U.S. Army, in fact, all of the major services. So I've sold the other side of it. I've sold these stores, the military store, PXs. Buyers, in my experience, have typically are paid almost like clerks. It always shocks me because there's rules out there that say you can make more money on the buy side than you can make on the sell side. great buying is what drives great companies. So Costco is a great example of that. Their buyers are like the princes of the Costco world. What is that true in the automobile industry also? Are the buyers in the auto industry also kind of just overpaid clerks?
I would say it's bifurcated. So this conversation on, cost structure, supply base, and those competitive dynamics, that's driven by a strategic procurement and commodity team inside of Tesla. Sometimes it's called global supply managers. Sometimes it's called strategic sourcing in some other companies. But these are people that are actually looking at raw material pricing. They're looking at tooling schedules. They're looking at how much tooling costs. They're looking at the labor. They're looking at the cost model on the line, and they're actually doing part program management work, part engineering work to drive that cost structure down. And then there are buyers in the company. There are buyers that are stationed in the factory. And some of that work is more clerical of like, I need to put purchase orders on. A lot of this, by the way, is automated now with ERP systems. But there are buyers in these companies. Some of the work is more clerical, but some of the work is somewhat strategic. And they're the ones that are actually like, hey, if I don't have as much supply as the demand signal I sent out, they're the first line of defense going in to try to figure out what happened. And they usually escalate to either the strategic procurement person if there's something that they need to do, or to the supplier industrialization engineer if there's a technical problem that needs to be solved between them and Tesla. So think of buyers as kind of like that first line of defense. There's definitely a clerical aspect to the job, but there's also extremely important because they're the ones that basically they basically align that material plan for the factory.
Yeah, so I guess I always used to divide it into what I would refer to as buyers and rebuyers. So the rebuyers could really be clerical because, as you point out, it's really just a matter of making sure you process orders. But even the buyers in my world used to be not very highly paid and not that great. I was wondering about the automotive world, since I'm sure you've been around those kind of folks. Not Tesla, because I'm not sure you've met the buyers at Tesla. My guess is that they consider that their buyers, their strategic buyers, to be a very highly paid and very important position. But what about the rest of the auto industry? What do you think what do you think about the quality of that line?
Um, I think it's hard. First off, I actually have met
Oh,
a lot of these folks, and in supply chain in this industry and multiple industries, and I led this personally. I just want to say, like, when you're building something highly specialized in terms of it's unique in terms of the number of parts that are in the design that are actually the percent that's unique that's designed by the OEM versus something that's very kind of off the shelf. You more of that activity switches to the strategic sourcing world, and then the buying function again is literally a processing function of getting the material supply into the factory to match with the build plan in the factory. So yeah, there are definitely buyers at these auto companies, and there's definitely in their factories, and they're the ones doing that first line of defense of like, hey, when is that shipment coming in? There, a lot of them are doing just in time, and they're managing the inbound timing of material to align with the bill plan, and they're trying to reduce inventory and so forth. So they have a set of goals that are a little bit higher percentage clerical, but they also have some strategic goals around inventory, around timing, around compliance to the bill plan. And then you go up a level to the strategic sourcing world, and they're the ones that are actually working with the suppliers, definitely on the ramp up, the tooling plan, the cost structure, the cost model, and on the sourcing of raw materials and where those are going to come from. That's more of on the strategic sourcing side, less of on the buyer side.
right, right. And you're not going to tell me whether you think Tesla's buyers, the strategic buyers, are better than the rest of the automobile industry.
Well, I mean, part of the COG story is that strategic sourcing group. And so if you're printing 9% COGs reduction and you're doing 3.5% in the quarter, they carry that flag. And then others support them, whether it's the engineering team and so forth, but they ultimately carry that flag.
All right, now let's
I
bring
think
it
they're
right
great.
back. Let's bring it right back down to your number again, the 8 to 10% that you believe is possible this year. I think the vast majority of that probably would be in the battery. but let's take your number. Let's take the low end of your suggestion to 8%. $36,000 vehicle, 8%. You're talking about almost $2,800 more coming off the car.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely doable. Again, you have this big downdraft that's occurring in terms of battery pricing. You've got Tesla improving on the 4680 efficiency of their own manufacturing, and you've got them increasing. The key is they have to be steady or preferably increasing volumes. And as long as you're doing that, you're going to have this dynamic too, where they can basically, a lot of their suppliers, they have two sources. And sometimes another supplier will come and say it's a spring and say, hey, look, I know you're buying it from these two people, but, we want to work with you. We have great tech. We think we can come in at a very competitive price point. We'd love to get your feedback.
Right.
And that's what OEMs do. And they'll use that third supplier to kind of wedge the other two. And then there's just efficiencies that are going to improve. They're going to go from a run rate of like 1.7 to 2 million last year to 2 to 2.3 or so forth. And that run rate increase in their own factories translates to their supply base as well. So they're going to want to grab some of those efficiencies back.
Okay. So if I'm
yeah.
if I'm an ICE manufacturer right now, do I believe that number that you just gave? Is that what I'm thinking, is that Tesla will do it again? And if they do believe that, are they shaking in their boots?
Well, the ones that are participating in EV, that's the question. They're actually going in the other direction.
Right.
Their procurement leverage is going down.
Right.
So what they're doing is they're actually capping their builds so they minimize their losses until they get to their next generation product, where they may take another step down in figuring out unit economics, but they're still behind Tesla. But the Chinese are like, they're the key competitors. They're gonna be taking their COGs down at that kind of rate, maybe even higher, if they're really hitting it with the volume. Again, it's a different world in China. It's very bifurcated.
Right.
The Li Autos, the BYDs of the world, they're going to be able to drive that cost down. The others, the Neos, if you're not growing, you're going to really struggle, even if you're in China, to do that. So. I wouldn't expect the GM or Ford with negative growth in ICE to be able to. I mean, I think they could have COGS decline, but nowhere near that rate.
So, but what I'm saying is Tesla could basically keep their current margins at 17.5% and drop the cost of their cars another 8 to 10% next year, which would put them well below the equivalent ICE car. Wouldn't that be a pretty scary thought for the ICE folks?
Correct. And and Tesla could put on a program where they basically say, and they've done this. Last year was a tale of two halves. The first half of the year were price corrections. They were north of 10%. No COGS decline program would ever be able to keep up with that. But everything since May of last year until what you see now are more regional and trim specific. And when you actually go in and do the math, that's why I keep stressing on X when these conversations, if you go in and do the math on the recent changes in Europe, you have 11% of the volume happening in Europe, and you have them doing a 6% change in price. So that's a 0.66% change in MSRP. And yet you saw them print 3.5% reduction in COGS. So now you can see why they're able to do sequential improvement in gross margin. And, yes, they have inventory discounts. Yes, there's a lot. By the way, this is extremely difficult to forecast. So I'm kind of talking about big moving parts, but I think you let off the show. This is extremely difficult to forecast, and Tesla said that as well on the call. But I go back to the way they're structured, their culture, and their approach to COGS. Whether it's difficult or not to forecast, they will do better than anyone else given the same circumstances.
Jeff, that was brilliant, of course. And exactly what I was hoping for. I mean, this I think is completely underreported by the investing community. I mean, the stock gurus and the pundits who are thinking that the cost reductions are over. Now it's just gonna be margin collapse. I think if people understood this, they would be buying the stock. That is not investment advice, by the way. They'd be buying the stock hand over fist this morning because this is extremely positive.
Yeah, there will be risks coming. There could be things that increase COGs, but in general, and they're not going to print 3.5% a quarter, but in
Every quarter.
general,
Right.
yeah, every quarter, the move will be down, in my opinion. And OEMs, everybody that builds anything drives their cost structure down until they end of life the product. It doesn't stop a year and a half before you go out of production. So.
Okay, Jeff, again, thank you so much for being on this morning and coming at short notice. That was really important. All right. And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.
Thank you.